ਘਰ ਇੱਕ ਐਸੀ ਥਾਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਹਰ ਕੋਈ ਆਪਣੀ ਨਿੱਜੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਸੁਨਹਿਰੀ ਪਲ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖਦਾ ਹੈ। ਉਹ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਉਹ ਰਹਿੰਦਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰਿਆ ਜੀਵਨ ਬਤੀਤ ਕਰਦਾ ਹੈ। ਇਹ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਪੂਰੀਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜਦ ਕਿਸੇ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਨੂੰ ਸਜੇ ਹੋਏ ਘਰ 'ਚ ਬਦਲਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ। ਨਵੇਂ ਘਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫਰੇਮਿੰਗ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਫਿਨਿਸ਼ਿੰਗ ਤੱਕ, ਡ੍ਰੇਪਰੀ, ਪੇਂਟਿੰਗਸ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਡੈਕੋਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਅਸੈਸਰੀਜ਼ ਤੱਕ, ਤੁਸੀਂ SK ਹੋਮ ਡਿਜ਼ਾਈਨਸ ਦੀਆਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਸਰਵਿਸਿਜ਼ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਸੁਪਨਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਹਕੀਕਤ 'ਚ ਬਦਲ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੋ। ਕੰਟੈਕਟ ਕਰੋ ਸੰਦੀਪ ਕੌਰ 6048259295।
Once again, welcome back to the program. Sex and Spirit series ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਉਸ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਖ ਮਕਸਦ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਮਿਲੇ ਅਤੇ ਖਾਸ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਬੱਚੇ ਹਨ ਉਹ ਇਨਫੋਰਮਡ ਡਿਸੀਜਨਸ ਬਣਾ ਸਕਣ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੋਏ ਕਿ ਸੈਕਸ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਪਿਰਿਚੁਅਲਿਟੀ ਨਾਲ ਅਲਾਈਨ ਕਰਨਾ ਹੈ। ਇਸੇ ਸੰਬੰਧ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੈਲੀ ਮੌਂਗਜ਼ੇਬ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਮਾਸਟਰ ਫੈਸਿਲਿਟੇਟਰ ਹਨ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਂਝ ਪਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਆਓ ਬਿਫੋਰ ਦ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ ਕਿ 3 ਮੁੱਖ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਸੀਪਲਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਨੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਲਾਈਨ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਕਿਹੜੇ ਹਨ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। So before the break you were about to tell us about those 3 major principles.
Yes.
So what are those?
Yes. So we'll work backwards.
Sure.
So I just said before the break that this is very much about the end result we want is good relationships between
Right.
men and women.
Right.
So that's unity. Now we can't have unity without justice.
Right.
Because without justice, the opposite of justice is like oppression, violence, you know. So we need to have justice in our relationships,
Right.
fairness, to have unity. You can't have justice without truth.
Right.
Okay, so that's where we begin. We begin by taking an honest look at how we've been impacted by the culture.
Right.
We take an honest look at what our experiences have been,
Right.
both in our early life as well as our, you know, once we become a teenager and an adult, you know, what our behavior has been. Because when we take a look at that honestly, we can start to see patterns, we can start to see where we've been influenced, where we may have stepped off the path, you
Right.
know. So that's where it begins, is honesty.
Okay. That's the foundation.
That's the foundation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so in relation to human sexuality, if you can tell us some theories which help in transformation and healing, let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay, well, you know, it's interesting because many of the sex therapy models, in my view, actually continue to support the unhealthy attitudes that exist in the culture.
Okay.
And so I came across some material by a woman named Dr. Anne Sterling Hastings many years ago, and she was writing in a way that was very unique. She was challenging the culture and saying some very courageous things. So I called her up and said, you know, Dr. Hastings, is it okay if I use some of your materials to support the work I'm doing? She said, no problem. In the last year, we've developed quite a close relationship, and I'm working very closely with her. So she has concepts like, which I'll talk about through the series, reclaiming healthy sexual energy, that we have an ability to align and become very much aware
Right.
about how we're running our sexual energy. We all have it. It's just a matter of how we use it.
Right.
And there's a concept called inside out versus outside in.
Okay.
I don't know if we'll get into that now or
Sure.
perhaps
If you
later.
could just give us a brief, knowledge about what is inside out and inside.
Sure.
Yeah.
So both men and women are influenced sexually by what's outside.
Right.
And we also have an internal prompting. That's where our natural sexual energy resides, is within ourselves.
Right.
And in increasing our awareness and being honest with it's a very helpful concept to start to consider, because you can start to see, where am I being influenced outside in? If I look at a picture, you know, that's an outside in stimulation.
Right.
And then I'm allowing myself to go in that direction. Whereas outside in is often unhealthy. Not always, but very often unhealthy. So if we can identify where, and sometimes we can get out of touch even with our body's sensations if we're not really being present with ourselves.
Right.
So part of that sort of taking off the gunk that we talked about before, that gets put up, sort of built up on ourselves, on our soul, is to start to identify, where am I being influenced?
Right.
And what most people find is that most of it is outside in. So, and this is where like lingerie and looking a certain way and having to, look sexy and all that has really nothing to do with true intimate connection between people. It's just things that we put on it, and then that's what we go by.
Very true, and this is what is the major factor today which is influencing people, because the outward influences are so much, and as you talked about looking good from outside and clothes and looking sexy, all these kind of things which are there, so they are absolutely kind of influencing the people, and the minds just divert, and that spiritual angle just finishes off.
Right. So what I'm trying to, I guess, get to here is that we're in control of our sex impulse. When we have so much outside, we feel out of control, like it's controlling us. Whereas, that's not, that it doesn't have to be that way. We can take charge and start to be in touch more with our sexual energy. And how does it naturally come? Because, many people are not in touch with that. They're so influenced by what's going on outside themselves.
Absolutely, you're right. And apart from that, that this word is considered to be dirty, and as you initially started, shameful, that guilt which is brought forward, and then people are running haywire. They're not. That's why the families are finishing off. That basic bonding which used to exist is no more to be seen. So how to bring in that element of spirituality into this?
Well, we talked about it previously, where our spiritual selves is like muscle. We need to use our spiritual reality. We need to practice kindness, and we need time with, prayer and meditation. And prayer and meditation helps us to be in touch with ourselves. And to be honest with ourselves, and to discern, the path and the choices that we're making. So that's a very important aspect of it. For many people, it's looking to the Word of God to guide their behavior. So we need to engage ourselves, keep reminding ourselves the reality of who we are, and recognize that our whole life needs to be harmonized, in terms of our spiritual reality. When I first started doing this work, I realized that we compartmentalize.
Absolutely.
We put sexuality and our sex life in a completely separate compartment, and that helps us to deal with the shame. There's actually a term called compartmentalizing, that because we see sexuality as shameful, and we see ourselves as shameful, we give ourselves permission to be sexual only if we step into that compartment.
Right.
We can't be sexual when we're being spiritual. Because we feel shame and they don't fit together.
That's right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, and
like
then
it's all
mixed up. Absolutely, and there's those culturally distorted perceptions about sex also. They are also a major hindrance, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So like you said, that alignment has to be there, and it needs to start from the family. And of course, the parents have to be a role model for their children. But once we are finding that in this fast-paced life, when you talk about time for praise or time for sitting and communicating, people don't have that time. And that's probably one of the major reasons. So with your study and with your experience, what do you find? What are the major blocks which are forcing people to go out instead of just focusing on the family?
Well, it's the materialism. We're really caught up in the materialism, and the reality is there's hard times. Financially, people are working very hard to make ends meet, and it can be very overwhelming. But something you said reminded me to say that it's the pain that people are experiencing, Harpreet, that I think is going to be the catalyst for doing something different. People are in a lot of pain around their sexuality, whether it's distance between their spouse, whether it's behavior they're engaging in that they feel so much shame about, they're living a double life, whether it's loneliness,
Right.
you know, and not feeling that they're ever going to maybe expand. Then they go on into the world of pornography to fill that void of connection, which doesn't really exist.
Right.
You know, there's people, and also, you know, there's abuse. There's a real issue of abuse that
That's
people
right.
have that history that really impacts them on a very deep level. And if we don't deal with that emotionally, it's going to bubble out in some other way. So I'll give you an example. One
Sure.
of the women that I'm coaching right now, unfortunately, had a very bad history of sexual abuse growing up.
Right.
And she's experiencing some things right now where she's very angry, she's emotional, she's, you know, lashing out at her children, no patience, and she's at her wit's end,
Right.
you know. So as we're talking and starting to get underneath, we realize that there's some things happening that are triggering some of her memories, even though it's
Right.
unconscious. But there are these it's almost like emotional scars
Right.
that exist. So unless we really start to deal with some of the pain that
Right.
results from the misuse, abuse of the sexual impulse,
Right.
you know, it's going to leak out in other ways.
Absolutely.
So I think this is part of the crisis we're in, but it's also a wonderful opportunity, Harpreet, for people to be awakened to.
Absolutely.
There's a
To
different way.
recognize something and then start working on that,
Yeah.
that is the first step, is the foundation by which we can come out of this mess which we
Yes.
have created for ourselves. And that's the reason we have started this series,
Yes.
Sex and Spirit series, so that people know about it, but they need some initiative and some kind of guidance, I would say, whereby
Right.
if they want to align back with spirituality, it can be done. Thank you very much for your time,
Thank
and
you,
we'll continue
Harpreet.
with our discussion in our next episode.
Thank you
See
so
you
much.
next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
ਸੋ ਅੱਜ ਜਿਸ ਵਿਸ਼ੇ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਜੀ, ਇਸ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਜੋ ਕੈਲੀ ਨੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਸਮਾਜ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨ ਨੂੰ ਤਿਆਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗੇ। ਇਸ ਸੀਰੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਸਟਾਰਟ ਕਰਨ ਦਾ ਮਕਸਦ ਇਹੀ ਹੈਗਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਮਝ ਸਕੀਏ ਕਿ ਸੈਕਸ ਇਹ ਕੋਈ ਡਰਟੀ ਵਰਡ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਇਹ ਤਾਂ ਸਪਿਰਿਚੁਅਲ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਅਹਿਮ ਹਿੱਸਾ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਸ ਨਜ਼ਰੀਏ ਨਾਲ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਕਿਹੜੇ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡਸ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਣਾ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਹਾਂ, ਉਹ ਚੇਂਜ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੈ। ਇਸੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹ ਸੀਰੀਜ਼ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ। ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਕੋਈ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੋਏ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਸੰਪਰਕ ਕਰਨਾ 6046037555 ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਈਮੇਲ ਰਾਹੀਂ harpreet@akaltv.com। ਧੰਨਵਾਦੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਪਾਂਸਰਸ ਅਤੇ ਐਡਵਰਟਾਈਜ਼ਰਸ ਦੇ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਦੌਲਤ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਤੱਕ ਪਹੁੰਚਦੇ ਨੇ। ਫਿਰ ਮੁਲਾਕਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਤਦ ਤੱਕ ਗੁੱਡ ਬਾਏ।